once you fix the money in your life, you have breathing space. You know, I've got breathing space now. Like I could stop this podcast, go and do things I want. I've got breathing space. I'm not rich, but I've got breathing space. And once you have breathing space, and then you start to realize you can do the things you want to, should do, could do.
Yes.
You know, I want to slow down more. I want to read. I want to go to the gym. Like, stop being such a fat fuck. And like you have that breathing space. And then you see all these other connections of the ills of the world. You think, oh, Bitcoin. So I think that's why you evangelize about it. And I think people don't evangelize about other parts of finance.
Totally.
Because why would you? You know, mortgage-backed securities. That's why they evangelize about it. Because I think people see it's so important for the world.
You're spot on. I mean, this is, I'm glad you put it that way, because another way of thinking about it is, what are the most popular finance books, right, in the world? It's like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, 4-Hour Work Week, right? Yes. All these things, they're about financial freedom, right? Yeah. And if you start looking at Bitcoin as just an extension or even a substitute in some ways for that term, financial freedom, then all of a sudden the evangelism makes a lot more sense, right?
I like the narrative that Saylor put out there the other day, that it's really digital property, right? It's property rights. And that means it's much, much bigger. And I keep talking about the fact that in the QE era, right, when money supply was expanding, the price of Bitcoin, quote unquote, went up because we measured it in the thing that was devaluing. And this is the part, right? My sign over there, right? One Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. But the average person doesn't talk in Bitcoin terms. They talk in dollar terms or yen terms or Bolivar terms. But if you lived in Venezuela, there really has never been much of a bear market in Bitcoin because the Bolivar was going down so fast, or Turkey with the lira. So it's not that Bitcoin necessarily gets better. It just is. It's that the currency keeps getting worse. But here's the thing. In the last year, M2 went down in the United States. Only twice in 100 years has that happened. And it happened in the last year. Well, wait a second. Then Bitcoin prices should have gone down. If we're restricting the dollar, right? We're not creating as many dollars, then Bitcoin price should have gone up. But Bitcoin prices went up 200%. Well, what happened? Supply and demand. And this is where the differences come in, that you can have a change in value of an asset because the currency you value it in is changing. I always talk about my house, right? According to Zillow, my house went up 50% here in Chapel Hill over the last 2 years. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. My house did not grow. My house didn't get more efficient. I actually had to put money into it to stop it from going, wearing out. The money got worse.
What I think is great about Bitcoin is whether you are absolutely poor, living paycheck to paycheck, or at the wealthiest, possible position, it benefits you. And I know that it's so hard for people who are just barely treading water with the cost of living, but there is something that you could probably start to reallocate, right? I mean, instead of spending money on, even if it's a meal or a coffee, I mean, everyone spends money that maybe they could have allocated it in a different way. Being able to put it into this piece of technology and an asset that has outperformed everything else, that actually allows you to be able to save. I look at Bitcoin not as an investment, not as something that carries all this risk and you're just sort of gambling and speculating and waiting to sell it and pass it off to something else. I see it as truly returning us to sound money and the ability to save. Again, I see it as a savings technology. And whether you make a little or a lot, everybody needs to save. And the alternative system that we've been living in has just been this house of cards built completely on debt. And we need ever expanding credit to create less and less real productivity and real value. And so our whole system, that's why people call it the fiat Ponzi, because it's just built on paper promises at this point that will never be paid back. And they're putting this really extreme downward pressure on society to pace this rate of inflation, and no one can, right? I mean, you can't go to your boss and say, hey, groceries are up 20%, so I need a 25% raise. And so it's starting to get to that point where I think the average person is feeling it more and more. In the United States, I think people were so lucky for so long because being the global reserve currency and really the closest to the money printer, it created a lot of immediate and long lasting, I mean, decades long wealth. The middle class was booming for a very long time. And now it's sort of collapsing because the system at its core is unsustainable. It doesn't create real value and growth and productivity. It exports a lot of the inflation to other nations. But now it's kind of like hollowed out at its core. And so from here to developing nations, the average worker is suffering and unable to keep up with the pace of everything getting more expensive. And this is what Jeff Booth talks about, right? It's like productivity, technology, it's supposed to drive prices down. You're supposed to be able to afford more, maybe work less. And we're not seeing that. It's not the reality. And we've turned houses into savings accounts. They're so far overvalued to what they're actually worth. There are shacks in certain parts of America that are worth millions of dollars. You have to renovate the whole thing. It's about to, fall over on itself. And it's worth, $2 million because maybe it sits near a beach. That's insane. That's not an indicator of a healthy economy, and spending when you don't have the money. That's not an indicator of a healthy economy. So we need something that addresses that. And again, I know it's hard for people who don't have a lot of money, but even putting a little bit, the fact that you can buy $1, €1, 1 yen, 1 ruble of Bitcoin, that will start to make a difference. It will. Otherwise, you're just treading water with money that's consistently worth less. I love that Bitcoin is apolitical, and people on the left and the right, they can embrace it, and the principles fall in line with what both sides are really passionate about and advocating for. It ultimately is about empowering the individual. And I think that a lot of people today are turning to politics and getting distracted by social issues that aren't really about the core of what's wrong, because they don't have the education about how our financial system works. They have a skewed version in their minds of what capitalism is. I mean, capitalism is about saving. It's about the free market allocating resources and everyone having an equal opportunity to create value. It's not about some people at the top who get to manipulate the cost of capital and interest rates, and the people closest to them benefit at the expense of everyone else. And then they say, oh, it's the greedy corporations, right? It's like, it's messed up. It's like we're flying in a plane that has no altimeter. We're navigating the seas without a North Star. And I'm so grateful that we've come to a place where we do have something like Bitcoin, because before I would have looked to the future, and I was for a while thinking nothing's going to fix this. It's just only going to get worse. And I'm worried about the next couple of decades and what my children, the kind of world they will live in. And now I look at it with hope that we have a tool that will help solve these problems, and it won't be easy or happen overnight, right? We're going to have a ton of pushback and obstacles, and we have to educate a lot of people, but we have a tool of hope and empowerment. And if we didn't, I don't know, maybe I'd be a big gold bug thinking we got to go back on the gold standard.
This too, like Bitcoin is like an IQ test. You get it at the price you deserve, and you have to do the work. You have to study for like 1,000 hours to really get it. And once you get it, especially if you get it early, the penny drops early, you do very well. But I love this because the parallels between Bitcoin and Tesla are immense. What's very bizarre is Bitcoiners hate Tesla, and Tesla people don't touch Bitcoin. It's very rare you'll find people having both, unless you guys are exceptions here at this table. I am in both because I like disruption. And I spend all my time trying to have a long-term vision of what can disrupt the world. They are both technology-based to a large extent. They are both, as you say, community-driven. Both Bitcoin and Tesla investors form very strong. They're very passionate, let's just say, about their assets. And again, going back to disruption, they're both going to change the world in a big way. And I think one of the most exciting moments I had in my life was when Tesla bought Bitcoin. I thought, ta-da! That makes complete sense. So yeah, they're both IQ tests. And he said proof of work. That's a big part of what Bitcoin is. But you have to do the work to understand what's going on. And that's why I obsess about disruptive assets, because that's how you get the most alpha. You do not make any money following Wall Street analysts. You got to be in before them.
I want you to imagine Bitcoin is, it's a city in cyberspace that's 276 blocks wide, 276 blocks high, 276 blocks deep, about 21 million blocks. Now imagine all 8 billion people in the world want to live there one day. They want to put their capital there. There's $900 trillion of wealth in the world. As people migrate from every other form of property and they've assets into cyberspace, you're going to see the Bitcoin network go from $1 trillion network to a 10x that to 100x that. And there really is nowhere else to go. It is the apex property of the human race. We believe that the highest, best use of capital is to buy Bitcoin and hold the Bitcoin. The Bitcoin is going to appreciate in value faster than the S&P index. It's going to appreciate in value faster than commercial real estate. And so there's no point in selling the winner to buy the losers. And Bitcoin is the winner. And so we're just going to keep acquiring Bitcoin with our cash flows.
Well, eventually, Michael. I mean, let's be honest. Most of the people who are, yes, sure, some people pass it on to their children, but like most of the people who are buying assets at some point want to sell the assets at a profit. So
let me say it a different way.
Okay.
People that use fiat currency as a store of value, there's a name for them. We call them poor. Okay. Anybody that's rich in the world, they own property. They own large swathes of land. The royal family of England, it didn't sell all of its property in central London in order to buy, currency or paper money. Nor did the royal family of Japan. Nor did the royal family in the Middle East. In fact, they want to own the property forever. I want you to imagine Bitcoin is, it's a city in cyberspace that's 276 blocks wide, 276 blocks high, 276 blocks deep, about 21 million blocks. Now imagine all 8 billion people in the world want to live there one day. They want to put their capital there. There's $900 trillion of wealth in the world. As people migrate from every other form of property and into cyberspace, you're going to see the Bitcoin network go from $1 trillion network to a 10x that to 100x that. And there really is nowhere else to go. It is the apex property of the human race.